Got a few people filtering in already. This is exciting.
Yeah, welcome everyone.
Oh,
I am here to welcome you to this webinar. We'll just wait a few moments while we just have people arriving. We started a little bit before 11 o'clock, so we will let people in and have them join us here. I'm fortunate I'm usually based in Calgary, but I'm fortunate to be in the office in Edmonton today. So it's definitely nice to be here. It's particularly nice to be here because in the kind of coffee room where I am, there's a giant croissant, which is the size of a kettle. It's massive, and it's been sliced up and absolutely delicious. So there's no better way to start the day. So I'm just checking out.
no kidding.
It was.
Awesome. I need one of those in my kitchen.
Want you to share. I want you to put a picture of that in the presentation next time because it doesn't look like an easy feat. So good morning, everyone, as they join us. Thanks for attending today. So I'll jump in. I'm Matt Hill, Director of Operations and Client Service here at Business Link, and very pleased to have Ryan and Megan join us from 910. They'll definitely introduce themselves, and I know they've got an offer for people on the call here as well. But just really to start with our land acknowledgement to recognize that we're on land, traditional land, meeting grounds, territories, gathering places, and traveling routes of Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, and the home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the lands that those who have come before us reside here now and in the future. So absolutely thank you for joining us from the corners and of the province and the cities and the rural communities all around Alberta today. It's great to have people here. I would like to start by, like I say, introducing that we're looking at brand personas today. And Megan and Ryan from 910 are thankfully joining us. At the end, I'd like to just kind of talk about a couple of our programs here. But for now, over to Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just a quick little housekeeping this morning. We have a couple of chat options for you. The chat, I will be asking, Ryan will be asking throughout today's session to share your thoughts, and we'll ask some discussion questions. The chat is a perfect place for that. If you have specific questions, if you can pop those into the Q&A section as well, we'll be watching those, but the chat can get pretty flooded. So if you have a specific question, we'll try and answer it in the chat if you ask it there, but it will be better filtered through the Q&A section. So if you can keep that in mind, I'm really excited about today. I see a few familiar names, so that's exciting as well. And we will go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen and let Ryan talk about 910, who we are.
All right. Well, thank you, Megan and the Business Link team. This is our second year where each month we're bringing a new topic for small businesses, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, startups, etc. And if you go back a slide, just hover on the word archetype. So the broad topic here is branding, but within branding, when you work with an agency and we're really trying to identify who you are, who your target audience, this exercise called brand archetypes arises, and it's very similar to a term that Matt mentioned as well, brand persona. So we're going to dive into this. For Megan and I, this is one of our most enjoyable topics. It's some of the most creative work we get to do with agencies. So with that, talk a little bit about 910 as an agency. So we're a small, nimble team in Grand Prairie, Alberta. This is our team. We actually have, we've had just 2 new team members that have joined us this week as well, so they're not currently on the slide. And really, we focus on working with small, medium businesses, predominantly in Alberta, and we are a full service digital agency. So we do graphic design and branding work. We also do websites, we do print, we do a whole lot under the digital marketing, including a training academy where we teach businesses, entrepreneurs how to take control of their brand, take control of their own marketing. And if we go back a slide, it's worth just talking about our mission. And I won't read it on screen because you can do that, but the gist of what 910 is about is we're trying to help small, medium businesses in Alberta succeed by really taking control of their brand and their digital marketing. And so we have a vision where if you're a business in Alberta, you have the support, you have the tools, you have the access to be able to follow best practices with branding and digital marketing. This is why we're partnered with Business Link. They support small, medium businesses. So do we. And so this is really a great opportunity for us to, share what we're passionate about and get into it. So if we go to the next slide, Megan, thank you for driving, by the way. These are sort of the various topics that we cover in our webinars. And as you can see, top left, brand, it's top left for a reason. When we're working with clients, the first thing we can and should work on is their brand, because that informs everything thereafter. The training you'll see is at the bottom right, which is usually once all of the foundation is in place, we like to provide training and resources and guidance so that our clients can use the tools, the foundational strategies that we've created with them, and it all starts with brand. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Megan, and she'll start by just defining some terms. What is a brand anyway? So over to you, Megan. And by the way, Megan is a certified digital marketing professional, which she received that certification actually through 910 and our credential learning as well. So you also could be a certified digital marketing professional if you're interested in increasing your skill set there.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. So yeah, what is a brand? Brand comes in many, many different forms. And if you ask 100 people what brand means, you're going to get 100 different answers. It's a really all-encompassing term where we talk about personality, we talk about expression, we talk about the visual side of things, we talk about the internal side of things. So some really exciting, creative things can come out of your brand. So when we think about brand, I want to boil it down to brand as a person metaphor. So we love these analogies at 910 to kind of help us visualize these terms. If you poke enough holes in it, you can definitely, or if you stare at it long enough, you can poke some holes. But this is a really solid identifying characteristic for brand. So when we think about brand, there's a few different areas that we focus on, right? We think about the visual side of things, right? The logo. That's the thing that we recognize first about somebody. If you're not familiar with a brand, but you kind of know their logo, you're going to be most familiar with that rather than maybe the way that they talk to people. The next part is the visual identity, the style. If you start to really get to know somebody, the way that they walk into a room, the clothing that they wear, the stylistic choices, the colors that they lean towards. One of my best friends, she's always wearing bright red lipstick. A little bit of an homage to her today, I guess, but that is part of who she is visually. It's not necessarily all of her defining characteristics, but it's something that's really important that shows who she is, right? This bold, exciting person. And so that's part of our visual identity, is showcasing that visually. The next part is the personality, right? And this is the core of kind of what we're talking about today, is who we are as a brand on the inside, right? Who you are doesn't necessarily change the way that you're, in who you're talking to. The way that you're talking to them might change, but the core of who you are stays the same, right? Your core values, what drives you in life, right? As a person, those core things that make up who you are. When we think about, again, maybe our best friend, when you're talking to somebody who doesn't know them and you're describing them, you're describing those core things that make up who they are, why you're friends with them, right? And so that's our brand insight. That's our heart, who we are at our core. Now, the last part of this is our target audience, right? Like I said before, the core of us, our heart doesn't change, but who we're talking to will. And the way that we talk to our friends versus the way we talk to our parents versus the way we talk to our colleagues isn't always going to be the same, because their relationships to us are different. That doesn't change who we are, it changes our relationships with them, right? So when we're thinking about ourselves as the brand as the person, we're going to want to intentionally think about the relationships we're curating with those different audience groups. Ryan, I see you came off mute there for a minute. Would you like to jump in here as well and share some insights?
Yeah, sure, Megan, thanks. We use a lot of analogies and metaphors to help understand sometimes these complex topics. And I love this metaphor because it really helps to just, you think of going into a board meeting for maybe a job interview or for whatever it is. this applies from a branding perspective. You need to know who's in the board meeting. If you know something about them, you're going to behave and act differently. You're going to act appropriately. You're going to ask the right question to the right person. You're going to hopefully provide what they're looking for. That's no different than as a business, you need to know who your target audience is, who your customers are. So if you don't know who's in the boardroom in this scenario, that's like not knowing who your customers are. And you can also recognize that in the boardroom, people are going to orient towards your face. That's what they'll recognize, and that's the logo. And if you show up for a formal meeting and you dress in rugby pants, you're like, what? You missed the mark on that. So how you dress is equivalent to how you present your business out in the market. So I really do encourage, our clients to work towards the technical understanding of the stuff we're working on, brands and whatnot. But the entry point is usually these simple metaphors. And even if you're a brand specialist, an expert, Megan and I return to these analogies because they're easier and stickier in terms of your understanding. So thanks, Megan.
Yeah, I got to jump
absolutely.
in because I've never heard it explained so neatly. Like, I think that is just like how the different voice for different audiences. I just think that's so clear to me in a way that, because I think about it from Business Link, like we are, our values of transparency, being non-judgmental, like they translate differently if we're speaking to a client to a government partner or a government funder, but they don't change, but the voice changes slightly. Yeah, I just think it's so cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
First question. I just wanted to jump in real quickly. This wasn't in the Q&A, so you'll have a better chance of getting an answer if it's in the Q&A. But Christy asked, if a company's brand is personified from the people who work the company, how does a small business retain the brand personality as staff change over time? It's a good question, and the answer here will vary differently if you are the person who is the company, like a realtor or a mortgage broker. It's a slightly different answer. But for a company like 910, we have to define the brand as its own entity. That's why it's appropriate to think of 910 as a person. The fact that 910 has 10 or so different employees, the brand is not willy-nilly. On Tuesday it's this personality, on Wednesday it's this personality, and it's a Rolodex depending on whose personality we take from within the team members. So it's really important to establish this at the company level and be consistent with that, and to be consistent with that as well. And so the right metaphor here is to say that 910 is a person. What is its brand personality? Back to you, Megan.
Yeah. And that is a really great segue into the next part of the presentation, which is talking about how to define and build up the brand from the foundations and establishing that idea of your brand as a person rather than a culmination of all the people that work for you, right? So if we take a look at what your brand should start with, it's your purpose. Start with why. Why are you doing what you're doing? I hear a lot of people when I'm doing these sessions or talking to students in our training programs, well, we're a business, we have to make money. That's why we do this. But that's not really why. Yeah, of course, everybody's in business because they need to make money, but that's why are you in this particular business? Why did you start this business? Why are you interested in helping these people? What is the service that you're providing and why is it that particular service? Really digging in deep to that core is a huge part of driving the rest of your brand forward. It's kind of like your North Star, your guiding force, your navigator, right? Because that's that purpose, that why you're doing what you're doing will guide your goals, what you're wanting to achieve for the next year, next 3 years, even the next month, right? Looking at that core purpose will help guide the rest of the decisions that you make in the branding process. So if we start with this concept of why, we kind of start breaking down into a couple different categories. We look at brand strategy and we look at brand expression. So strategy is going to be kind of some of that theory work behind everything else. The brand expression is going to be the more creative side of things. So this is where we'll get into the brand personality and archetypes that we're talking about as well. So this is the why, that purpose, right? So then we can start thinking about the vision. What do you want your impact to be on the industry, on your customers? What do you want them to say about you, right? Then your mission, how are you going to accomplish that? And then your values, those core things that make up why you're doing what you're doing, right? So you can see things like safety. Safety is a really big value in a lot of industries, especially if we're thinking about Alberta and the type of industries we have present in Alberta. Safety is a huge value because we want to take care of our employees. We want to provide safe work environments so that people stay, so that we can provide the service that we're there to offer, right? So all of these things kind of connect back together to the core of you, why you do what you do, your purpose. Then if we look at the next part of this, we have the internal brand. That's who you are. And then we start thinking externally, your positioning, where you sit within the market. And this is where we start to identify our audiences, right? So our audiences need to match who we are, right? If you are in a particular industry to serve cupcakes to moms who don't have time to provide cupcakes to their kids on their birthdays, right? So you want to give them their time back and provide these beautiful, lovely cupcakes. Your audience personas are probably not going to be teachers who want a snack on a Wednesday, right? Your purpose aligns with who you're targeting. Then we start to look at competitors. Who else is offering these services? Who else is serving the same clientele? And then we start to look at our differentiation. What sets us apart, right? What's unique about us? Then we get into our brand expression, the character of who we are, our characters here. So this is where we can identify our brand personality, our archetype. This will guide how we express ourselves to our audience personas. And you can start to see how this is all kind of intertwined and connected. Why we need to establish our audience persona first, because then we can identify our personality and how we can talk to them effectively, right? And then we start getting into our communication, our tone of voice, how we want to present ourselves, the story that comes from that. One of the reasons why global bestsellers like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings are so big and have lasted so many years in the market is because of the stories that they tell, and they're so effective. Oftentimes, when we look at businesses and branding, the name comes first. People think about the name that they want first, but you can see all of the things that come before that that define the name, because the name wants meaning, right? And all of these things give that meaning. The last little section here is that visual expression, our visual identity, our brand presence, right? The things, the ways that we show up in the world physically. We can think about jingles or even smell. Oh, my earbud fell out. We can think about Coca-Cola and how Coca-Cola has such a distinct flavor. That's part of its brand, right? So all of those different parts of expression are kind of at the tail end of branding, because they wrap up in a nice little bow. They put a nice paint job on the car, right? They're the things that express who we are at the very beginning. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to share that this screen here, we call branding with a capital B. The capital B means that it's bigger than what you think. It's bigger than just the logo. It's really going through this framework. This is a framework that we use to draw out, to facilitate with the client so that we can populate all of these cells with the right information. And I want to compare that to, if you've ever worked with some of the resources from Business Link or Community Futures, or even trying to get financing from a bank, they're going to ask you to build a business plan, or they're going to ask you to fill out a business model canvas, or have you done a SWOT analysis for your company, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. All of these are frameworks where in and of themselves, they're not useful unless you take them seriously. And the information and the insights that is drawn out and then sort of appears at the back end of these, That's the starting point. And the reason why you do that is it's meant to inform everything that comes afterwards. And so this is why 910 focuses on doing brand strategies at the beginning as a foundation, because at some point we're going to work with clients and they're going to want to do a website or maybe some social media. And we're not going to be able to answer any questions. We're going to be shooting from the hip blind unless we can return to the brand strategy and say, well, who is our target audience? And what are our products and services? And what are the relevant keywords? And what personality or archetype should we show up with consistently in the market? So I really want to stress that this framework, like many other frameworks out there, are only useful if you take the time to fill them out properly, and then most importantly, apply them afterwards. So back to you, Megan.
Yeah, we have a couple really great questions in the Q&A. First one is, what are our thoughts about brand capital? Brand capital or brand equity this is where it really comes from, right? Because what you're doing by building up all of this solid foundation is giving yourself the capability to continue to grow that, to give yourself that established base in the market. If you are consistently changing who your audiences are, or who you are, or how you're talking to them, it gives you kind of unreliability in the market, which harms that end goal of brand equity, right? That foundation that you've built for yourself. So all of these things really definitely tie into that as well. And then I see Ryan's also typing an answer to Alyssa. What about growth? If brands are like people, can they grow and change? Absolutely. Things can grow and change. The core of who you are, though, the purpose, how you define yourself as that brand, shouldn't necessarily deviate that much, right? Yes, absolutely. We grow and change as people. We grow with our experiences, as do brands. They respond to what's going on around them. That doesn't mean that the core of who they are has changed.
I'll just add
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
maybe two finer points to that. On the first question, brand capital or brand equity, as Megan rightly called it, pretend you're trying to buy 910. Okay, so we're gonna have a price, and every business can sell for a price. Imagine that price being you get all of our, you buy our corporation and everything comes along except for the brand. You do not get to continue to operate under the brand name 910. And so, well, I'd like to operate under the brand name 910 because that carries some amount of quote unquote brand equity. So it's very easy to isolate the value of brand equity when you think about in that exercise. And that is something that is considered in the merger, acquisition, or a sale of a business, whether the brand goes along with it. So it does hold value, intrinsic value, and explicit value on a balance sheet in that way as well. And then the other part about
yeah, I mean, I think about that from lots of the small businesses that we support. Really, there's tremendous value in that, and maybe there's not a ton of others. Like I think, someone wants to sell a dog grooming business. Well, it's the value there is not the clippers or the place you rent. The value is, Sandy's dog grooming business. Like it's those kind of intangible brand things that have value for lots of clients, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight there, Ryan, as well. And Matt, just thinking about kind of those driving foundations as well. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into kind of, most people think that visual identity is a really big part of brand, which it is, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a smaller part than what a lot of people think. These are things that we think of with that visual brand, right? We have the colors that identify us, the typography, the photography styles, the icons that showcase who we are, and all of these should reflect that core purpose and who you are. If you try and put a tractor engine in a Honda Civic, your Honda Civic is probably going to blow up, right? Because it's not suited for the purpose of that car or engine, right? So we have to think about it like those things need to match each other so that it flows properly, so that your brand can drive forward. This is another great example, completely different brand, completely different purpose, right? another really beautiful brand as well that shows kind of that sleek look that the brand exemplifies. Shout out to Maxmont. They were attending a few of our Business Link sessions last year, which is how we met Maxmont. Some really incredible branding that went into this project as well. So, all right, so let's talk about expression, right? The reason that we're here today, this personality, this brand personality that we're trying to identify. So let's look into what this really breaks down into. So we have two types of archetypes. We have our brand archetypes and we have our audience archetypes, right? Understanding our audience personas, identifying who they represent is really important in order for us to be able to build a relationship with them, right? Our brand archetype is us, our audience archetype is them, right? So there's two sides to this. So I'm curious, what does, if anything, do people know about archetypes? This is a term that I was introduced to in my English degree, so in a literature sense, but it's very transferable to what we're talking about here. So I'm curious if you want to just drop in the chat, what do you know about archetypes and what they are? And I will let Ryan, while you're typing those out, I'll let Ryan talk a little bit about Carl Jung and the unconscious mind.
Yeah, and a little hint, just think of Star Wars. And so psychologist Carl Jung was one of the pioneers of the theory of archetype. And another name that you may have heard if you're a bit of a geek is Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, or the hero with 1,000 faces. And this idea that there's these archetypal characters in stories that show up again and again over time. Different cultures, different societies, somehow they have this consistent narrative, this consistent structure where there's these quote unquote archetypal figures that show up consistently. And so Joseph Campbell noted this, and he's like, every story is the hero of the story of the hero, whether you're talking about Star Wars or you know, like Lion King or Die Hard with Bruce Willis, and there's always a hero and there's a specific journey. So the hero is one type of archetype. Every society over time has recognized what a hero is. And I'll talk a little bit more about heroes in a moment, but an archetype technically, and you don't have to worry about it being technically, but an archetype technically is a reversal or the opposite of a stereotype. A stereotype we generally would recognize as not helpful in society, especially when they're negative or they're judgmental. But a stereotype is us looking outwards and making pronouncements or judgments onto someone, noting what we view as almost like similar characteristics that are showing up in a way that they're like, yeah, they fit the stereotypical mode of XYZ, whatever it is. An archetype is almost, and this is Carl Jung's theory, is that an archetype is subconsciously embedded in our mind. It's the world, if you will, projecting onto us, that no matter what, where we're born, what society we're part of, and where we are in time, we will recognize these archetypal characters in society, and therefore they end up showing up in story and myth, and then ultimately in the modern times represented in brands and commerce and capitalism, all this sort of stuff. So an archetype would be an example like a hero is an archetype, a mentor is an archetype, a sage or a wise person is an archetype, a damsel in distress is an archetype, a bully is an archetype. Every society across time recognizes what a bully is. They may have different words from it, but the characteristics of a bully is recognized kind of throughout time. So that's the thing about archetypes. And when you then sort of fast forward into the 20th century, savvy branders and marketers had recognized that because these archetypes are inherent, they're subconsciously in our minds, we can tap into them. And so although there's hundreds of different archetypes out there in the world, marketers have tended to group into a classification round about 12 to 16, depending on which framework you're looking at, of generally positive association archetypes that they can then attach their brand to that general archetypal character type. And so the best way to show this is through examples. So maybe let's go to the archetype wheel, Megan.
Yes, and we already talked about all of this. We are getting so ahead of ourselves. That's awesome. Um, so there's also a cheat sheet that Linda can pop into the chat as well that covers all of these as well, just in a little bit more depth. But what we're looking at here is just the key characteristics that we see in a lot of different brands.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, Megan,
and
if we just go back,
yeah,
can
go
we
ahead.
just go back one slide before we jump into the wheel? Apologies to,
Yeah.
I know I jumped around out of order there. Yeah, even that's fine. Yeah, this one will work. So this is an example. I think it's one slide back there is a deck. It's like a tarot card deck that I got on Amazon called archetype cards. And so it's really interesting. And from a branding perspective, there's about 150 cards on here, and it shows classically archetypes that are sort of recognized within literature. But again, a subsection of these tend to be used in marketing and branding. But again, there's the archetype of the goddess, of the athlete, of the child, or the innocent. And so again, which ones are relevant for marketers to use and to try to tie their brand to? So we can go to the archetype wheel then. And Megan, maybe talk a little bit about that archetype worksheet. It's obviously an exercise we do in our training academy, and then I'll explain a little bit how this wheel works.
Yeah. So with the archetypes cheat sheet that was just dropped into the chat there, it goes a little bit more into depth about each of these different characters. And we can see kind of it's divided into 4 different sections. But what you're going to see in that cheat sheet is a description of what each of these kind of defines itself as, what the character type desires, what they strive for, what characterizes them in the marketplace. The other thing that I just want to bring up here as well, and the reason that we think about archetypes as part of our brand personality is part of the storytelling. So if we think about that brand framework, and part of our brand expression is communication and storytelling, and I brought up how the reason that things like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Ryan mentioned Star Wars are such universally renowned stories is because of those storytellings. But part of it is because of these archetypes that they display, because they're so universal that everybody can relate or connect to those characters in some way because they display these archetypal character traits, right? So when we're thinking about how to express ourselves and our brand personality out in the market, that storytelling is really foundational to building ourselves these characters, and these characters help build relationships with our audiences. So yeah, Ryan, go ahead a little bit about how this wheel works.
Yeah, and again, this wheel represents certain archetypes that have been sort of, again, isolated so that they can be used within marketing. And then so to the extent that a brand associates either implicitly or explicitly to this brand, it will have a better psychological hook, if you will, to the client. And so think of M&M, yellow and red, those two sort of peanuts, candy peanuts that just are always exploring the world, getting into trouble. They're a bunch of buffoons. They're tripping on each other. They're innocent and lovable, but they're really just a bunch of clowns. And so what they are is that's what they are. They're clowns. They're the archetypal character of the jester. And so there's different levels of gesture. There's the jester. There's the lovable fool. Wile E. Coyote was also a lovable fool. Just he could never catch the Roadrunner, but we still liked him because he was just a lovable fool. Such a dummy, really. But yellow and red as M&Ms, that's what they are. They're the lovable fool, the jester, right? And so you're like, okay, well, then you can think about other archetypes. So if you look over to, where's the magician on the top right. So there's brands that really tap into this idea of magic. And of course, Disney is the prototypical one. So this experience of wonder and mystical and all of this stuff that's really tied to this magical universe and experience. And so Disney taps into that. And Megan mentioned earlier that there's the archetype of the brand or the company, and there's also the archetype or the archetypal aspiration of the customer. And so the best way to think about this one is think of an outlaw brand. And so an outlaw brand in the top of the wheel, an outlaw brand would be something like Virgin. So Virgin Records and Branson, Richard Branson, he's an outlaw brand. So Virgin is there. If you think about Diesel Jeans, they're an outlaw brand. And probably the most famous one would be Harley Davidson. So Harley Davidson is obviously the badass brand, leather, and like you would never mess with a gang of motorcycle guys, like a gang of Harley Davidson motorcycle guys. So that's the archetypal brand of that's the archetype. The outlaw is the archetype of the brand. But if you think of the customer, think of me. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm a white collar guy. I work in a white collar sort of job, and I live in the community. But Harley Davidson wants to be an outlet for me to feel like a badass on the weekend. So when I want to tap into the feeling of an outlaw, I can do so through my association with a brand or a product. And I have friends that own Harley Davidsons, and they're not badasses, but on the weekend, they dress like badasses, they go cruising like badasses, and they feel like a badass outlaw. And so that's what a brand does. And so when you're thinking about these archetypes, it's like, how does your brand show up in the world from a personality or characteristic perspective? And do you recognize that your target customer base may have an archetypal aspiration that they could tap into by doing business with you or by using your products? So 9-10, through our training academy, we're a little bit aligned with the sage. The sage is the mentor or the professor or Yoda. Yoda is the most famous sage. Yoda does not solve Luke's problems for him in Star Wars. He guides him, he asks him questions, and he generally points him in the right direction. And so within the training academy, we're not gonna fix your branding and your marketing for you. If you're in the training academy trying to learn, we'll give you guidance. We'll be a bit of an accountability layer, and we'll point you in the right direction. And so that's really interesting. Now I want to go to the next slide and use an example of the outlaws. Okay, so this is a famous YouTube sort of news reel from, I saw it on Good Morning America years ago. And the gist of this, and you can search for it and maybe I'll put the link in. It's somewhere in the US, a young girl set up the prototypical lemonade stand. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this massive motorbike gang came and lined up and bought out all of her lemonade and raised money for, whatever she was raising money for the local community. And this was all over the news. And so why was it all over the news? Why was it so compelling? And so before going to the next slide, go back one slide. Oh, we just
sorry, I ruined it.
So what I want to show here is on this pinwheel, we know that the outlaw is the bikers, but the girl, what archetypal characteristics is the girl, right? The girl in this case is the innocent on the left there. Okay, so now if we just go back to that slide there, the one where it's sort of revealed. Yeah. So whenever there's a juxtaposition, it catches people's attention. And here, what's so compelling about this story is you have these badass outlaws that are finding a way to create a connection in a story with an innocent. So there's this unexpected matching. And so quite often in stories, in myths, in brand marketing, juxtapositions will be played against each other, and they'll have more resonance with you. You'll have those goosebumps. There will be something that's noticeable or remarkable, worth remarking. And then probably the last thing, I just want to go back to the pinwheel, Megan, if we can. This applies in movies as well. And probably the best example is if you think of Forrest Gump. Now think about the pinwheel. Where does Forrest Gump align in here? And if you've watched Forrest Gump as many times as I have, I probably watched it 15 times. He's the best character in movies that I can think of that really celebrates and represents the archetypal wheel. And the reason why we love him is he's such a contradiction. He's a hero. In Vietnam, he just ran through the jungle with bullets ablazing to save Lieutenant Dan. But he's also an innocent. And so Jenny takes care of him when he's getting beat up. But he's the everyman. He's so relatable to everyone. And, he's a caregiver ultimately in the end when he takes care of his son. And you can go through, he's also a sage. Life is like a box of chocolates, and he drops so many truth bombs and philosophical insights, but he's a dummy. He's a jester. He's a lovable jester. So what's so compelling about Forrest Gump is that he plays the archetypal wheel, and at every moment he's pulling on you in these weird different contradictions. I'm not recommending a brand to try to do that. Rather, I'm trying to showcase that when you successfully tap into an archetypal characteristic, you are going to subconsciously be resonating with your target audience in a way that is very real. And lots of brands do it, and that's what the theory of archetypes are. So I'll give it back to Megan. If this is relevant,
Um,
we consider that in our marketing, right?
yes, absolutely. So that leads really well into a couple of great questions that we have here in the chat as well. So, is it less effective if we use combinations of archetypes? So, publicly in your marketing, you should be choosing kind of one core direction to go. But this wheel is not meant to pigeonhole you into one area or another, right? It's to guide the way that you interact with your audience, right? If you have an audience group in one quadrant, but another audience group in another quadrant, you're going to speak to them in different ways. And the archetype that you choose to do that with could be different, right? Based on their needs. Now, when we look at our public facing marketing, talking about Harley Davidson again for an example, they're not going out and portraying themselves as maybe the caregiver as well. But there might be some allusions to that in the way that they talk to specific audiences, right? So their public facing marketing is very much on the outlaw front, but some of that more subliminal marketing could play into any of these other categories as well. So don't think about this as I have to stick with one and nothing else. Your brand will show characteristics of all of these different types of archetypes, but thinking about what drives your brand forward and when you're thinking about your communication, what decisions to make, thinking about where you fit best will help guide that. Another question is, so does the archetype find us, or do we decide on our archetypal client and find them? That is a really excellent question. And I would probably say a little bit of both, because it's not just you going out and seeking a place to be. It's partly defined by who you are as the brand, and partly naturally how your audiences come and filter back to you, right? There are a lot of ways that we express ourselves in marketing that naturally just kind of filters out the right clientele for us, right? Based on the keywords that we use, the language that we use, who we want to work with us, who our ideal client is going to naturally filter down that way as well. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Lois has a great question. Can you give an example of everyman archetype? My favorite example, they've moved away slightly from this, but in the US, there's a very famous celebrity. His name is Mike Rowe. He was made famous from a show called Dirty Jobs. And what he does is he goes out in the field and he profiles hardworking, everyday working men, typically in the trades, plumbers, electricians, construction workers, etc. So Mike Rowe is the prototypical ambassador of the everyman, of the prototypical every working man. And so some wheels will now go gender neutral in everyman, but what everyman really means is the generalized working class if you're going back to Roman times, the plebeian or something like this. So Ford has multiple different divisions and brands, and so their F-150, the truck, is the truck for the prototypical working man. And so what Ford did is for many years, they aligned themselves with, as brands sometimes do, with a celebrity. So Mike Rowe was the he was the voiceover when you had these Ford commercials. And so the commercial would be a job site or an electrician or a construction worker. And Mike Rowe was endorsing F-150 as implicitly the brand for the everyday working, hardworking American. So that would be the prototypical example of the everyman.
Yeah, absolutely. Samson asks, so after finding the archetype with which your brand is operating, is it possible to divert into others and grow loyalty or brand with previous archetypes detected? So that depends on if you're talking about your brand archetype or your audience archetypes, right? Your brand archetype shouldn't divert too crazily because it should represent who you are. Now, in terms of identifying audience archetypes, absolutely, you can grow into other markets and identify other audience groups and archetypes that you would like to bring into your brand. But in terms of your core brand, you shouldn't have 4 different core archetypes that are all exemplified front forward in your marketing. That would lead to a lot of brand confusion.
Well, this is related to when you start to get a fragmented brand. We have a lot of our
Mhm.
clients that I'll explain it on the visual side, where we'll sit down with them and we'll go through their website, we'll look at their business cards, we'll go through their social media, and we'll see that over the last, say, year or 2 years, the way they showed up in the world has changed significantly. They've changed their fonts, they've changed their colors, they've changed the general tone or style of the photos they use. All of the design principles are not consistent. And sometimes it's just because we're just a bit disorganized and we didn't know any better. And that's a fine answer. We can work with them and fix that. Other times we'll say, well, I got bored with the green, so I switched to blue. This is the biggest sin. Like you may get bored with your brand because you're living and breathing it every day, but your customers are are engaging with we significantly less frequently, and they're also engaging with it in a very busy world with brands like 1,000, 2,000 brands a day. And so if you're changing your colors and your fonts and your textures, and then ultimately your personality on a regular basis, you're not going to resonate. You're going to be fractured. You're going to be fragmented. So in the same way you want to be consistent with your visual brand and your communication style, you want to have some amount of consistency with your brand archetype. Brand archetype is there will be lots of branders and marketers that will have lots of critiques to say about this exercise, which I'm very sensitive to those as well. Because if you use this in a way that's not sophisticated, you can get pigeonholed into something accidentally, or you can try to do that flywheel and be Forrest Gump. And on Thursdays we're a hero, but then on Saturdays we're an innocent, and next quarter we're going to be an outlaw, and then we're going to try to do some caregiver marketing. You're all over the place. That's not going to resonate very well with your target audience. So that's kind of what I would say with that. There's a bit of a word of caution here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, uh, just being conscientious of time here, I want to tie it all together. So what? What's the big deal? Why do we talk about this anyways? So these are some of the really core reasons. There's a lot of reasons, but the core reasons why we establish our brand personality as part of our branding process is one, it's going to give your strategy direction, right? When we're thinking about building a business strategy, a marketing strategy, identifying new customer audience groups, things like that, your personality will guide who you reach out to next, how you define your marketing, and those big burning questions that you're going to have throughout that process, right? So giving all of those pieces direction and pointing you in one linear way rather than kind of a jaunty path that you're contradicting yourself, right? The next is building relationships with your audience. We've talked about this a couple times or alluded to it a couple times, but it's really that's the whole point of what we're doing is to build relationships with customers, right? To give them something that they need. And we do that by building relationships with them. And so we tell a story in order to help our audiences feel more connected to us, to build that relationships, right? It's also hugely beneficial for training AI tools. Part of what we do at 910 is work with custom GPTs. So we train a GPT, chat GPT model for people with their brand identities so that every time you go in to use these tools, you're able to get information back that aligns with your brand personality. So if we say, hey, ChatGPT, 910's brand persona is the sage in this context, please provide me with a script for a webinar, for example, right? The script that it comes out with is going to be leaning more towards the sage archetype character than if I hadn't identified that. So it's really helpful to be able to streamline your marketing processes and efficiencies that way as well. And of course, ultimately creating consistency across the board. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to cover a lot more about these AI tools and how to implement them
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in our series with Business Link in 2025. But I want to underscore that here. Earlier, when we had the brand strategy framework on screen, I said it's just a framework and it's a useful framework if you use it properly, just like a SWOT analysis is, or a business model canvas, or any of these tools that are really meant for businesses and entrepreneurs and startups. And the fine point here is too many times businesses, entrepreneurs will fill those out as an exercise and they'll put it in their folder in their drawer, never to sort of use them again. No, they're meant to guide decisions. And then now that we have these tools like AI, as Megan mentioned, these AI tools that we're going to use, ChatGPT is the one that most people are familiar with by now. Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't give it good prompting, if you don't give it good context, if you don't help it understand who you are, who your target audience is, it'll give you an answer, but the answer will be pointing in the wrong direction. It'll be shooting from the hip. So all of these tools, if done properly, gather the information that ultimately provides the best prompt. You've heard the term maybe prompt engineering. If you haven't, you'll hear a lot about it in 2025. So a lot of what we do with these brand strategies is so that you can have a roadmap to guide your decisions. If you're going to use AI tools, use it to train them. If you're working with us, guess what? The work we're going to do is going to be guided by those decisions, and we're going to leverage those tools as well. So I know we do have a special offer for the tail end, so we're getting close. Megan, I'll give it back to you, and I want to make sure that everyone sticks around just for the offer at the end.
Yeah, for sure. So the consistency in marketing, Ryan was talking about brand fragmentation. That's really what this is about, right? Making sure that we stay consistent with the way that we show up in the world. All right. So our key takeaways: one, always start with your why. Start with the core purpose of who you are. That will drive the rest of the process. Your logo, your visual identity are really a small part of your brand as a whole. There's so much more background before we even get to that part. Your archetype can help give your brand expression direction and the way that you communicate. And building your brand will help you connect with your audience in a really meaningful way. So those are kind of if you take away nothing else, these are the core things to be aware of. All right. So coming up next, we have identifying your audiences. We're going to be talking a lot more about how to identify who you're talking to in the market. And then we're going to be diving into social media marketing and some content marketing strategies. So definitely tune in for those. Those are going to be coming up over the next few months. Now, if you were joining us last year, you would have seen an offer that we had for you, but this year we're doing something a little different. So we're actually in the process of building some really exciting things, but in preparation for that, we would like to offer 10% off any of our services to any of our attendees. So feel free to scan the QR code, head over to the link. I see Ryan dropped it off in the chat there. But for today, this is what we're really excited to be able to share with you, and definitely come back in a few months for some more really exciting things that will be showing up. So thank you all. I know I rushed through the last little bit there because I wanted to make sure we got to this point, and just highlight that you can also become a certified digital marketing professional at a 10% discount. So that's exciting. Ryan, did you want to share any last thoughts, insights, any last questions? Throw them in the chat and we'll chat about them.
Last little bit, I guess. I put a link to, if you see it on screen, you can also scan that QR code. It's going to go to the same place, but the link's in there. So it's 10% off any of our services. But given today's context, I would recommend brand strategy. In that, brand strategy is the starting point and the foundation. You may be more advanced with that, and you may already be ready for the next step. Max Mont, which was Fred is a leadership coach. We met him here on a webinar. He actually came to us with the brand strategy already complete. So we jumped right into the visual branding and the website. So wherever you are, we can meet you. It's not we're going to force you into a brand strategy if you already have those foundational items. The other thing too is in 2025, 910 is positioning ourselves, repositioning in the market as an AI first agency. We have AI so integrated in so many of our services, how we do our work, but it's also built into our service offerings for clients as well. So if you're a small, medium business and you want to take advantage of AI, but it's overwhelming because it is, you'll find that what we're going to do is we're going to simplify the offerings. We're going to use analogies. We're going to get you started with just the introductory tools. An AI chatbot on your website to better answer questions for customers and to help automatically book meetings and inquiries. That's an example of a very simple implementation of an AI tool, and we have lots of offerings. So, Matt, back to you. We're really excited to be back on board for the year. Yeah, I might have missed something, Megan.
Just one last question in the chat there. So in branding, if your competitor falls within your archetype, how you distinguish yourself. So when we're thinking about competition, think about distinguishing yourself as what makes you special, not necessarily what everyone else is doing the same as you. So thinking about how you're unique, and maybe that's in your service offerings, maybe that's in the way that you connect with your audience, maybe that's in the communication itself. your personality isn't everything, right? I know we've spent a lot of time talking about that today, but when we're looking at the way that we're competing in the market for the dollars that show up, thinking about how you're different rather than how everyone else is the same can be really helpful, and just focusing on those things. So I
Yeah,
hope that
'cause some of that,
answered your
yeah, it's
question.
presumably inevitable, isn't it? I suppose if we're a leadership coach, we're probably going to be in that. We're going to have elements of the sage about us, you know, and most others, but there's presumably more kind of nuance there, that makes you different. Yeah. This has just been such valuable. It's so front of mind for us at Business Link as well. So it's always great when we can. I've just been kind of making notes as we go, so it's been really, really useful for that. So just one other kind of program to highlight that kind of directly ties into this here at Business Link is the digital marketing program. So if you're at very, very early stage, you're kind of exploring this, you need to be in business, so a registered business, that you have a website of some type, but you're just looking to make those improvements and to level up. Digital marketing program is definitely for you. I promote that with some hesitancy because the next available appointment, I think, is the end of April. So that we know there's a lot of demand in this space, and that people are really, really interested in improving and recognize that they need to. But so there's lots of options available, and obviously these webinars are very important as part of that program too. So thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much, Megan. And we look forward to our next presentation here.
Thank you all so much. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, 910. We'd be happy to chat with you and answer any other questions that you have. Our website is 910.ca, and you'll be able to reach us there. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Matt. And
Thanks.
great questions, everyone, for being so engaged.
Yeah.
That was fantastic.
Business Link for the win. Kudos to Business Link. You guys are.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks. Bye-bye.